Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 7 of the virtual coffee break. In this episode, we are discussing the key considerations for selling in Europe on Amazon as a vendor. This is the follow-on webinar from last week, which saw Karina and I discuss the same subject, but for sellers instead. Karina, hello, how are you doing?
Hi there, I'm good, thank you. I'm very good now because I've nearly finished my cup of coffee, so I'm feeling it. I've got a second win for the day. So, and yeah, excited to talk about this topic because this is a bit of a complex topic actually, and can be a bit blurry. So it's good to cover it off to help anyone that's probably a bit confused by it all.
Yeah.
Partly down to Amazon not necessarily setting expectations and being clear on how this model works.
Yeah, and we felt that when we were mapping out our potential subjects that actually this one deserved an entire episode because it is different for vendor and seller. So last week we focused on seller, this week we focused on vendor. Mm-hmm. Where's a good place to start then? What in terms of considerations?
I think first off is that is just to highlight the similar considerations for both vendor and seller. And we won't necessarily go into those today because we talked about those last week. And so for those interested can watch episode 6, where of course, if you're going into Europe, you're going into additional marketplaces, whether it be France, Germany, Italy, and Spain, you're of course going to have the language barrier you need to manage, the cultural barrier, and you're going to be you'll need to check on any compliance with regards to VAT, as well as legal compliance. So all those considerations are consistent no matter how you're selling to Amazon, whether you're selling as a seller, direct to consumer, or vendor as a wholesaler. So I guess it's really the two areas I would say that we chat about today are one, this European fulfillment network and how it works on vendor, and then also the ad side of things and how that plays into it all as well, because vendor is not unified like seller, and that's where it becomes confusing. And for those that aren't familiar with the term unified when it comes to Seller Central, what I mean by that is when you go into Seller Central, you can select the country within Europe that you want to work in. So you've got one account and you've accessed 5 or 6 now with the Netherlands marketplaces. In Amazon, on the vendor side, it's a bit different. You effectively need to have a vendor account within each country.
So European Fulfillment Network, or EFN, as it's known for short. Can you give our audience a quick overview of actually what it is, what it entails?
Yeah, so what it means is that Amazon are effectively redistributing inventory across all marketplaces. So if you as a vendor are selling to Amazon in the UK, effectively in your mind, you're probably only selling to Amazon in the UK. But what can happen is Amazon then take that inventory and then redistribute that and start selling it on Amazon Germany, Amazon France, Italy, Spain. And you as a vendor aren't necessarily informed about that. That's sort of why it can come as a bit of a surprise. So Amazon makes that decision depending on the product category, because of course they can't do that with electronics, for example, with a different plug and voltage. But some of the products that really can be sold quite easily across all marketplaces, that is what Amazon does. So that is known as a European fulfillment network. And that can be slightly different if you're selling to another country as well, in the sense that if, let's say, you're selling to Amazon Germany and Amazon UK, sometimes Amazon can start redistributing inventory that you've sent to Germany to the UK, even if you sell directly to the UK as well. Because what they're doing is they're using this European fulfillment network not only to redistribute inventory, but redistribute inventory in a very advantageous way to them, as in what country has the lowest cost price, what country has the lowest lead time, what country has the better performance, not performance rating, but the one that's meeting all the right hitting the right metrics and so forth. And so it's a lot more complex in terms of how the system and where the system decides to order inventory from.
Karina, in my days at Amazon, I remember this taking place for some of the vendor accounts that I managed. And one of the problems was that if it was a brand that had localized teams, let's say a UK team, a German team, they were almost competing with each other in that sense, where maybe their business wasn't looking at it from a whole European aspect, but we're looking at it on a local market base. So I presume that given the way that the EFN system works, that can be a bit of a conflict for internal teams that maybe manage one market versus another.
Yeah, completely, because it means that all of a sudden you want to hit your, well, it also comes to, Amazon see it almost as manufacturing and sourcing. And if you are a vendor and you go into your analytics reports, and I won't go into too much because it can get quite complex, there's different numbers for each, because manufacturing relates to how many sales have been sold at that brand level in that country, and sourcing is down to how many products were sold from the products they had bought from you. So they can be different amounts because manufacturing relates to that country, whereas sourcing can mean that your product's been they purchased product from you, but it's been sold in multiple countries. And so, yeah, it can get very complex and causes conflict, because all of a sudden Amazon might be buying all the inventory from the manufacturer in Italy, and then all of a sudden it's being sold in Spain, and then all of a sudden the manufacturer in Spain is saying, well, you're not buying any of our stock, what's going on? And it gets confusing and it gets complex, and you're looking at these reports trying to understand it all. And that's when a lot of businesses start considering these pan-European agreements, which always makes me smile because it's easier said than done. We are seeing Amazon, and I know we've spoken to a few vendor managers that are now pan-European vendor managers. So effectively, they're looking at all different countries instead of, as you said, localized support. But that's easier said than done when you've been working with Amazon for 10 years and you've got one set of commercial terms with one country, another set with another, and then all of a sudden you want it to be the same. One country is going to come off short and one company is going to benefit from it. And then it becomes, I've seen it where countries almost start battling, saying, I'm not going to go pan-European because that means my terms aren't going to be so great. And then another person is like, yeah, I'm up for pan-European. It means I'm going to get X amount improvement on our costs. So it's quite conflicting, definitely.
Yeah, I've even had cases in the past with clients where we've been managing their European business. But we've maybe had the UK stop all advertising because stock was being sourced from another country.
Yeah.
And you have this kind of, as an agency and a consultant, you're in this tricky place because you're trying to do what's best for the client, yet the client's trying to do what's best for their division. And so the UK team doesn't want their sales being purchased from Germany. The German teams are happy because the exchange rate's better, and that's there's a bunch of conflict there. So it's a really interesting landscape to be in if you are on that boat. Yeah.
And it's messy because I often get asked, well, we don't want to be part of it. No, you don't actually have the option. Amazon just does it. Unless you have a valid reason, or as we mentioned earlier, the product categories, unless there's a compliance reason as to why your product shouldn't be sold in another country, then it will. And so this then becomes a point for brands that it can become messy if you only sell to one. If you say, oh, I only want to sell to the UK, then it becomes messy because you'll end up finding you're on all the other countries. Amazon took your listings, did a machine-based translation on your listings, so they can far from optimized, probably look very messy, and your products are all on these countries and markets that you didn't necessarily want. So that's when you have to start thinking more strategically, as in, okay, if I go onto Amazon UK, it's most probable that I'm going to be in all these other countries because Amazon's not going to let me. I've got no valid reason why they shouldn't. So it's going to happen. But then it's about thinking about how you manage that, because you want to then own that experience and not have rubbish translations, for example, on other countries, and just not have control, because effectively you don't have control if you're only selling to that one country.
And this comes back to the whole discussion of, is it actually worth being a vendor? And that's a different discussion point. But
Yeah.
I suppose one of the downsides of being a vendor and having that relationship with Amazon is you do lose an element of control of how your brand is sold, pricing, and where your brand is sold. So if you're very sensitive to which marketplaces you sell your brand in, you have to think about whether the vendor program is potentially right for your business.
Yeah, completely. Because yeah, as you say, you can't control what marketplace you're in, and especially if you're a brand or you're a distributor with exclusivity and you have territory agreements, that becomes very difficult as well, because you end up stepping on another company's toes.
Yeah, and then I think the kind of other key consideration you mentioned at the beginning was around the advertising, and we found this out ourselves from our own experience of managing this, where when you start selling in other countries, if you get an individual agreement for those countries and you get a separate vendor account, then what you really should be doing is running the advertising in those separate portals. Otherwise, if you're not doing that, you're still funding one market and who will be raising POs for that market versus the other, and you can then have Amazon actually getting annoyed at you for that. So we've seen that in the past, but that would just require you to just log into different portals. We've seen in the past where established brands have basically had to start their entire advertising strategy from scratch to almost relaunch those campaigns on these new portals. There's not much you can do about it. You're just going to have to do it. But if you've already been running multiple campaigns in countries, then you'll have a wealth of data there that will help speed up the process. But it's not easy. It's definitely not easy to do. It's a bit of a headache. It does require the groundwork. But otherwise, running it just from the one portal, that's what some brands still do.
And I think that highlights that when you are going into a vendor relationship, and it's all well and it's easier to say it now for those brands that are already been out of vendor for 10 years and they're going through the pain because Amazon's just evolving. But if you're a brand that's considering it now, it highlights the importance of strategizing and understanding the bigger picture. Because if you're tunnel vision saying the UK, and then you're like, oh, my listings are on Germany, oh, I might as well try and run the ads on them, that you're sort of reacting. You want to say, okay, I'm going on the UK, I'm quite comfortable being in other countries, let's see if I can agree a pan-European agreement, or at least have consistency across all countries when it comes to commercial terms, to avoid all this sort of X country ordered more than the other, trying to make it more of an equal level playing field, and planning that all in place so you don't have a lot of these issues that businesses are running into because they never thought of that in the first place. And or even if you can't have a pan-European agreement, at least go into each of these vendor market, each of these countries, and own that relationship without Amazon taking control of that in other countries without you realizing. Yeah,
well, it's a discussion I think that probably brand owners, brand directors, marketing directors have a lot of questions on. And so of course we'd encourage anyone that watches this, if there's still areas that you're not sure of how logistically it would work, how it would affect your wider business, please drop us a note. We'd love to kind of discuss that further. But I think those are probably the two main considerations from a vendor side, right?
Yeah, definitely. And as you say, they are complex, and it does require a lot of thinking about what your business model is and everything. And so we do a lot of consulting for companies on how they should manage all of that, because there's a lot of, you do need to think about it. It's not about just, listing some items on a seller and then all of a sudden you decide you want to have them on Germany. There's, you've got to understand the repercussions here, which is in general with going as a vendor, right? You need to understand all of that and just be aware that when you sell in one European country, you're not selling to that one European country, and just be aware of the European fulfillment network.
Well, the fun of dealing with Amazon. So it brings its challenges, but
definitely.
Cool. Well, that's a wrap up. That's a true virtual coffee break. Maybe the shortest episode we've done, which means we're
Wow.
getting better at keeping it short.
That means, yeah, we've obviously we drunk our coffee but too quick.
Yeah, it's done. So thanks everyone for listening. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, like our LinkedIn page, send in your questions or queries. We're always open to further discussions. And yeah, tune in for next week. We've not yet decided, Karina, have we, what we're going to discuss?
We haven't done. I think let's leave it to the audience and see what we get, ideas that we get this week. And then based on what we get from you guys, we will decide on what's the most appropriate topic for the next Friday, or as we say in my household, Fry-yay. So
Fry-yay. Cool. All right. Thanks everyone for joining. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Bye.